Brandon Mull is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Fablehaven, Dragonwatch, Beyonders, and Five Kingdoms series. A kinetic thinker, Brandon enjoys bouncy balls, squeezable stress toys, and popping bubble wrap. He lives in Utah in a happy little valley near the mouth of a canyon with his wife, their 11 children, and 3 mischievous cats. Brandon loves meeting his readers and hearing about their experiences with his books. Awesome. Well, hi, Brandon. Welcome to the LitJoy podcast. Thanks for coming.
I'm happy to be here.
Awesome.
You're so
Very
excited.
organic. Very organic.
Yes.
Perfect.
Here we are.
Here we are. I know. And we're really excited. So we're doing your Fablehaven series as special editions right now,
That's right.
which has been a very fun project. They have some cool custom features. And it's fun to get to talk to you in person. We don't get to do that with authors very often. So that's pretty fun.
Good. Well, yeah, I'm glad that worked out this time.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your origin story as an author. Let's just start right at the beginning.
Okay, so here's my origin story as an author. When I was a kid, I didn't like to read books. I especially didn't like to read thick books. I liked when my parents read me a picture book. That was great. But if you gave me a thick book, I would find something else to do. Until someone gave me Narnia. And when I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that totally changed how I felt about reading. See, I lived in my head a lot as a kid, and I had a really good imagination, and I would just play games in my head. And I didn't know that books could sometimes do better than I could do myself. And when I read Narnia, I was like, ooh, there's other people who play awesome games in their heads and share them. And so I started daydreaming about Narnia like crazy, and I wanted that to come true, and I wanted to live there, and I wanted to go there. So I went to my grandma's house, and she was old, and she had a big closet. So I was like, maybe. And I remember pushing my way through the clothes to the back of the closet. And at the rear of the closet, I found a tiny set of doors. And I was like, it's showtime. So I went in through these doors into a small room filled with canned peaches, which was a huge disappointment.
Yeah.
No.
Because I wanted to go to another world. I wanted to kill all the monsters, probably become their king. And instead, I was the Lord of the Canned Peaches. And it was my sad little domain. And that is because I couldn't go into another world for reals, because I couldn't actually go to a Narnia, that started me daydreaming about my own fantasy worlds. And so when I read Narnia and then couldn't go there, all that daydreaming I'd done as a little boy, which probably had more to do with Disneyland rides and cartoons I saw, shifted into daydreaming about fantasy worlds and fantasy adventures. And pretty soon I had my own characters and my own stories. And that was the genesis of me writing fantasy.
Very cool. So when was what was the first piece you wrote that you can remember?
My first piece was in first grade. It was pre-Narnia. It was about a space explorer who fought a big green space lion. And so like I have weird fantasy-ish, sci-fi-ish stuff just in my DNA. Like ever since I was a little boy, I make up crazy stories. Narnia kind of focused it. I wrote short fiction in high school. That was where I first really started to explore fantasy scenarios or action scenes or like the kind of stuff I like, adventures, really. Mm-hmm. And then I wrote my first novel right after I graduated from college at BYU. And that was called The Other End of the Hippo. And it was a story about a kid who gets swallowed by a hippo into another world. Oh, that later turned into my Beyonders series.
Okay, yes.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm like, and what a brilliant title. The Other End of the Hippo. I'm all brilliant.
I was like,
immediate yes.
Yeah, I'm all, yes.
it seemed quirky and funny. It never ended up being the actual title, but that working title was a fun title that I liked.
Awesome.
Yeah. It ended up being Beyonders, A World Without Heroes, which sounds more majestic, but a little less quirky. Someone still gets swallowed by a hippo as a portal into another world, though.
That's pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I like immediately just saw that as a picture book, and I'm just like, please write it.
Yeah.
That could be so fun.
We've got Chris here. Chris is my publisher, so he can make that happen if he
make it happen,
inspired.
Chris.
Yeah. Other End of the Hippo as a picture book, Chris. That's something on the to-do list.
I think that would be totally eye-catching for like a picture book.
Oh, just an iconic title.
Yeah.
That markets itself. That's amazing.
Cool.
So we'll transition into how you came up with the idea for Fablehaven. I loved your origin story of like becoming an author, starting young. And I love hearing Narnia was your inspiration, it sounds like.
Totally.
I mean, I'm sure there's more, and we'll talk more about other books, I think. But
Sure.
So tell us, when did Fablehaven begin and how did that start to form?
Yeah. So I used to live in Connecticut and my house was surrounded by trees. And I would daydream, what if there was monsters or creatures out in those trees that could eat my little brothers and sisters? Because I was the oldest of 5. And I tried to think, how could that come true? Or how could I make that happen? I was like, oh, what if there were secret wildlife preserves for magical creatures? And that's why they could be out there in the trees and actually existing in our world. And at first I thought maybe that would be a fun idea for a short story. Because back then I was in the mode of writing short stories. Oh, I could write a short story about a secret wildlife park for magical creatures. And actually, after I submitted my Other End of the Hippo book to many different places, I ended up in a talk with a guy named Chris Schobinger, who liked how I wrote, but he didn't want to publish that book. It wasn't quite the right fit, but he's like, do you have other stuff? We like kind of your voice. We like what you're doing. And I said, well, I have this idea for a short story about a secret wildlife park for magical creatures that I could expand into a novel. I could see a novel there, like if I flesh it out.
Yeah.
And he was really excited about that concept. And so over the next 5 months, I wrote Fablehaven.
Very cool. What is that writing process like? So you've mentioned young, first grade Brandon writing a short piece. And then you know, I'm sure as you've grown older, it seems like you've been writing your whole life. And what does your writing process look like now as you've kind of developed into, a career author and you have lots of projects?
Sure. So I have lots of daydreams. My pre-writing happens in daydreams. And I think a lot of people daydream. Sometimes we daydream about the vacation we'll take or the relationship we want to have or, any number of things maybe that pertain to our life or our future. And also sometimes we daydream about awesome stories or our favorite team winning the championship, or like we start to daydream larger than life a little bit, right? And for me, I have always kind of daydreamed about fantasy. Like if I'm stuck in traffic, things like, what if 20 dwarves attacked a giant? What would that look like? How would that fight go? And so I just lots and lots of weird thought experiments with lots of what ifs with fantasy. What if there were secret wildlife parks for magical creatures? What kind of creatures would live there? Who'd want to help them? Who'd want to harm them? What secrets or treasures do they guard? And like asking those kind of questions and seeing if they lead somewhere, seeing if it gets cool. Most of my daydreams get worse the more I think about them. Like the longer I think about them, the more I'm like, there's nothing here. Or like nothing here that I would ever want to share. Or like I'm boring myself, But every now and then, like that idea of secret wildlife parks for magical creatures, the more I think about it, the better it gets. And so when I find one of those ideas where the more energy I put into it, the more it develops, the more like the seed keeps growing into a sapling and then a tree and then a forest, right? The more I go, yeah, there's something here. This might be a story world worth really exploring. So the first thing I do is daydream and vet my daydreams. The daydream happens automatically. It is my default setting. It is how I cope with life and how I cope with boredom. If I was your employee, I'd be your daydreamy employee. It's just what I am. And so the professional part of that is vetting the daydreams, sorting the daydreams, finding the ones that, wow, this has turned into a theme park in my mind. This has turned into a really fun place to spend time. What if I dramatize this into a story and let other people spend time there too, right? And so when I find something that I want to dramatize into a story, I then pitch that concept to a publisher and say, would you pay me money to make this into reality?
Yeah.
And, this is all but the first time, right? The first time you just have to write the book and see if a publisher buys it. But since then, I have a daydream. I vet the daydream. I see if a publisher will pay me to make the daydream. And then once I get a green light that someone wants to pay me some money for it, I in earnest start formulating that into a story. And then I start to try to dramatize it one scene at a time. It is a mix of planning and improvising. I have a basic plan. I have a basic skeleton of beats I want to hit, and I make discoveries as I go.
Yeah. Do you ever find that your major beats change in the story?
Yeah, quite a bit. And to some extent, a lot of the time, the first draft has a feeling of finding the story. Like I sort of know, sort of like you're building the bridge and crossing the bridge at the same time.
Like the Romans?
Is that what they did?
Yeah. The Romans were building and crossing. This is an aside, but I watch a lot of documentaries.
Yeah.
And one of the major feats of engineering that they did was they needed to get across this river into this new country because they wanted to conquer it.
Yeah.
And so they were building the bridge as they were crossing the bridge. They figured out a way to do that.
So me and the Romans have a very similar thing.
You're like, we're really similar.
that is one, like my two big metaphors for writing a book is that I'm building a bridge as I cross the bridge, or that I'm climbing a mountain that doesn't exist until I climb it.
Oh, it's almost like it's like shooting up from the ground, like boulders forming as you're walking.
Yep. Yeah, and like reaching for a handhold that doesn't exist and then finding it and then pulling yourself up and reaching for a new handhold that doesn't exist and then finding it, hoping to eventually reach the summit.
What do you do when you're, building that mountain and then it falls out and you're like, can't grasp the next thing? Like, I think it could be writer's block. It could also just be like doubt and kind of what's your process in continuing? Yeah,
it gets frustrating sometimes. For me, it's usually transitioning into the next good scene, finding and knowing the next good scene, and then transitioning into it. And when I get stuck there, I know I'm stuck usually because I transition into a scene and I start writing it and it's just boring me and it's doesn't feel cool. And I go, if it's boring me, heaven help my reader, because my book is like my kid. I create it.
Yeah.
And I love my kid. But if my kid's boring me, like I'm going to expect the neighbor to be entertained. You know what I mean? and so it's like, yeah. So I just have to think about it until it's not boring me. You know what I mean? Usually I have to add trouble. Sometimes I have to do a different scene. Sometimes the scene I'm doing just isn't right. So like when I get truly stuck, to me, that's my warning signal I'm doing bad work.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, take a walk, clear your mind, open your mind, like think of new possibilities, new ways I could take it. Often it involves introducing more trouble to make a scene work.
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering like what you do when you hit writer's block. Is it usually just like change your environment, take a break? You realize writer's block for you is it's not as exciting as you'd want.
Yeah. Writer's block means it's time to do some thinking.
Yeah.
Like I write and write and write as much as I can write. And sometimes it's not time to write. It's time to do some thinking. Like I'm stuck with the writing, like nothing's coming. And so it's like, okay, do some thinking. Maybe like at my best, that looks like lifting weights or going for a hike. It also can just look like me wandering around my room and pacing. Usually it's something in motion. I describe myself as a kinetic thinker.
Yeah.
Popping bubble wrap or fidgeting or walking around, like bouncing my knee. Like I'm always kind of like
in motion a little bit.
If I'm in motion, it helps. My brain works better for some reason.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A hike is beautiful because you get outside and you have all the stimulus kind of making you think down different paths and think in new ways. And that worst case scenario, take a hike or take a shower. Chamber of solitude, comfortable, cozy, warm water. And sometimes I get my best ideas because there's nothing to focus on except enjoy the warm water and like kind of zone out and boom, all of a sudden I have answers. I
find that I'm in the shower is actually where I do a lot of my processing. So not just generating creative ideas, but also like processing the day, processing emotions. It's because we are so easily bombarded with distractions or other things, especially if you're writing on a screen. Yeah. It's just like, it's so easy to make a leap to social media or Google or something like that. And so I do find that showers for me too are where I just sit in silence, but everything is going on up here,
I am nodding with you.
I'm the same way. I totally get it. Yes. It's like white noise with the water too. And so it's just like this perfect, like you said, chamber of being able to like focus and harness my thinking. Mm-hmm. I love it.
I've seen an interview with Aaron Sorkin where he said like he'll take like 6-7 showers a day when he's working on something hard.
I was like, what?
He's got to find something else.
He's like learned.
He's just a prune.
I know.
That helps.
Like, very clean.
And I've never gone to that extent, but I absolutely get where he's coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny though. I'm just imagining like everyone being like, is she okay? She's in the shower again. That's very clean.
Yeah.
Very clean.
Squeaky clean and full of ideas.
There's the title for your next kids book.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Or maybe my self-help book.
So I have a question around, so it sounds like you were just always a really imaginative child, very into daydreaming, as you said.
That is true.
Like you kind of came that way.
AKA weird, but yeah.
I was like,
I really was. I was like a different kid. If I was in your class when we were kids, you'd be like, that dude's kind of a weird kid. Like, because I was just living in my head so much.
Yeah.
And it took a while to learn how to like live in your head a lot and also like function.
Yeah.
And for a while, it was like more living in my head than functioning. So that's just keeping it real. So what I had to do was something which I call harness the crazy. And,
I love it.
And you learn how to like make good use of that weird or crazy or different part of your mind.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of value there. Like that's what I make my living off, is that weird part of my mind.
Well, that was the question. Follow-up is, actually, my daughter's really similar to this, actually. She loves writing stories. Every day she's sending me mini books that she's writing, and she's all up in her head. And so I just really love and appreciate this perspective that you have. My question is, when did the writing piece kind of connect for you? And were you always kind of naturally a good writer?
No, I was not. That's true. Like the imagination part, yes, always natural, native language. It's just it's how my head works. Communicating what I'm seeing, no, I was not terribly good at it. In fact, often kind of poor at it. Okay. There was a point where the stories in my head exceeded many of the movies I saw and many of the books I saw, and I was fairly young when I felt that happening. And so I was like, I should write these down and share them with people. Like, because at first it was this feeling of, I've got this awesome story in my mind and no one knows but me.
Yeah.
And how do I even share it with someone? Like if they knew what was going on in my mind, they'd be like, oh, that guy, he's weird and his mind's cool. Like it would have been that, but there was no way to show it. No, it's cool what's going on in here. I look all spacey, but what's going on in here is cool. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, I got to find out, how do I show it? And I was like, well, I wasn't the kind of guy to like get a big team of people and make a movie. And so I was like, but maybe I could figure out how to write it down. And so I tried to write it down. And the first time I tried to write down one of my stories was an incredibly frustrating experience, because what was in my head was vivid and rich and cool. And what I wrote down looked like scribblings. It didn't convey what I saw in any sort of effective way. And at first it made me horrified, because I was like, well, maybe I'm just a simpleton. Maybe this is cool to me, but if I actually speak it, it's not cool anymore. Right. And with some time and experience, I learned it was actually a different problem. I just needed to improve my communication skills. Mm-hmm. I needed to improve my writing skills. What I was seeing was cool, but I needed to learn how to convey that in a way that was compelling. And so I started paying attention to how my favorite authors built their scenes. And I practiced writing my own scenes. And over time, I got better at it, until there reached a point where the stuff I saw in my head was somewhat represented in the things I was writing. And I'm still trying to get better at that. I still think I have a better imagination than I have a writing skill set. But I'm always trying to up that and improve and learn from other writers and learn from my own mistakes and write a better book next time.
That makes so much sense, making the distinction between creativity and skill, that it takes both. I remember I read Stephen King's On Writing, and which is more memoir than self-help, but still. But
it's got great tidbits of self-help.
Brilliant. Yeah. But he did talk about it was like, you either kind of have it or you don't as a writer. And I found that to be actually the part that I disagreed with in his book, is that I do think that there are skills that you can develop to get better and better at being a good writer. I feel like the imagination part of it is something that it's hard to force someone to be imaginative.
Yeah. So, the have it or you don't part of it, I think, is, do you like to tell stories? Does your imagination make up stories? If that's not something you like or something to do, maybe you don't have it or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But if you have that component, if there's stories you want to tell and you have a brain that likes to make up stories, then the rest can be learned for sure.
Yeah. Do you find that you make up stories about your life, or that mostly just fictional worlds? Because I find that some people who make up a lot of stories about their life can tend to be very creative people as well.
Yes.
And so
there's lots of different ways to express, right? And the way my head works, for some reason, I love to do it in the shape of fantasy. But even though I do fantasy, that doesn't mean I'm not influenced by my life. I mean, I could take you through book by book and take things that are personal and that are me, that are in each of the books. I mean, a really obvious one is in my Candy Shop War series.
Mm-hmm.
The main character is a kid named Nate who moves to a town in Northern California in 5th grade. I moved to a town in Northern California in 5th grade. And he's got to get used to a new town and a bunch of new people. And I based the town on the town where I lived when I was in 5th grade. So in some ways, Candy Shop War is a memoir that I then layered magic on top of, right?
Yeah.
Magicians coming to town with magical candy and adventures. And so I took my 5th grade year and turned it into a fantasy Goonies kind of.
Yeah.
You know,
that was my son Liam, his favorite.
I've got a good chunk of readers where that's their favorite one is the Candy Shop War stuff.
Yeah. But he also does love Fablehaven. So he's
cool.
a big fan. And you came to his school and he was like, "Do you know Brandon?"
Oh,
I was like, "Yeah, we're close."
We are now, right?
But it was before I had met you. So he was just so excited. But yeah, I love that in that one, in all of your stories, that kids so easily see themselves as the main character. And I think you find sometimes it is hard to relate to main characters in young adult and adult fantasy because they're so epic. You know, like I'm not going to overthrow
like a whole kingdom,
you know, but there is something so relatable about the main characters in your book. And I am curious how character development comes along for you. Like how characters find their voice, and is it similar to how your fantasy world builds itself? Or do you draw from people in your life, or kind of both?
Yeah. So as far as the characters that I create, the characters that I most created, hoping readers would feel like I'm that main character, were Kendra and Seth in Fablehaven. I so much had that as an intention that I never give a clear physical description of either Kendra or Seth on purpose, so that whatever you look like, they might look like you. You know what I mean? So that you could fit into that. And there's plenty of descriptions on their personality and who they are, but I leave the physical descriptions out on those two characters. I almost don't like that there's pictures of them anywhere because there's officially technically no picture of them. Like they could be any race, any hair color, any whatever, you know? And with that, if they were absolutely generic people, they would be incredibly boring. So they're very fleshed out as far as a personality. But I did deliberately leave out some physical descriptions on them because I wanted Fablehaven to feel like a kid was discovering that for themselves, and they could be, if they could be Kendra, they could be Seth, whoever they wanted to be. In general, with my characters, it's just spending time with them. It's a lot like the world building. The more time I spend with them, the better I understand them. There's a certain amount of understanding that happens as I spend time with them in my head and see them in scenes, visualizing a movie in my mind. And then I always understand them better after I've written them for a while, because all that stuff that's abstract in my mind becomes a lot more concrete with what they actually say and actually do. And pretty soon they have a history and a track record, and I can stay true to that and see what's forming. And then after I've written a character for a whole book, sometimes I find their voice better toward the end of the book, and I can go, okay, now I got to go retro. Now I know who they are. And so now I can go back from the start and make them who they are from the start.
Yeah.
Right. So that's more or less what my character development looks like.
Very cool.
That's so smart that you knew right from the get-go, sounds like, that you wanted to keep the kids, you know, Kendra and Seth, like.
It was deliberate.
Yes, like very neutral. And as soon as you said it, I was like, oh, you're right. Like, I just have been enjoying the story, you know, with my kids, and I didn't think too hard about their physical description, but like, I think I have created one in my head without really realizing that it wasn't perfectly described. Yeah. And I love that every kid gets to do that for themselves. It's interesting because as we've worked on your project for Fablehaven, you know, we get together with our art coordinators and we have big discussions around putting the art together and what that looks like and just the story as a whole. And all of them had said something similar, which was, I don't know anyone else that writes like Brandon in regards to really writing true, like middle grade characters, in the sense that like they sound like kids, they act like kids relate to these characters so strongly. And because they've read so many, and in comparison, they were just like, nobody writes like Brandon in regards to getting kids to read, honestly. And several of the members on our team said his series, Fablehaven, is what got my kid reading. And I just think that is so amazing and commendable, because we're all about that, getting, readers going.
It is a huge part of my goal. Like I think everyone in their jobs would like to A, make a living, and B, do some good.
Yeah.
And for me, the doing some good part of my job is trying to be a champion for literacy, trying to get reluctant readers to read.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, I was a reluctant reader until I found the right book.
Yeah.
And so I understand that principle even personally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to write the kind of books that if I say, hey, you should try this for fun, it'll actually be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not going to work every time for every kid, but I have a strange amount of times that it does work.
I
have a lot of times in my signing lines where from both kids and adults now, because I've been doing it for a while, I'll hear, yours was the book that made me get it with fiction. Like I started to read heavily with your book. And you can't hear that without being really excited if you're me, because if I could meet one person, I would meet C.S. Lewis and say, thank you for Narnia. Because that was, I can't now, but maybe someday in the spirit life or something.
Yeah.
But when I think, oh, I'm the C.S. Lewis for them. I was the book that made them like reading.
That would make me tear up.
That hits me hard every time. It's really cool.
Hello, readers. This episode is brought to you by Brandon Mull and the LitJoy collection featuring the beloved Fablehaven series.
One of the things I love about this series is not only are we releasing them one at a time so that more people can afford to collect them, but we also are doing this beautiful debossed leatherette feature on the covers. So it feels like your own magical field guide that you're carrying with you. So each one has a different leatherette cover with different designs on it. It's going to be so beautiful.
I love that.
And they're priced at $39.99 a piece.
And each book in the series is going to be available for purchase, as Alix mentioned, separately throughout the months. And it's going to be going all through 2024.
And if you want to learn more about these, be notified, or just shop, you can go to litjoycrate.com/Fablehaven. That's /FABLEHAVEN.
Do you personally relate to any of the characters you've written?
The most obvious character that I relate to would be Nate in Candy Shop War, because I kind of based it on a certain year that I had, and I gave him an extra helping of my attributes just because I was kind of purposely patterning the character after myself in 5th grade. But I just can't write characters that I don't relate to. I can't do it well. And so every character I write, from the good guys to the bad guys, have things that I can relate to and things that help them make sense to me. And that means there's a little bit of me in them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Part of my advice to young writers is put yourself into the story as much as you can. When I say that, I mean like your sensibilities, your judgments, be meticulously, or like be scrupulously true to what you like and what you think is best and who you are, because that's what'll put your fingerprint on the story. That's what will differentiate it from everybody else's stories, is that you've put yourself into it, your judgment, your, it doesn't necessarily mean your personality traits, but your observations of how the world works and how humanity interacts, and like everything that you really think, try to bring that together into your story. And that, more than anything else, will make it unique, right?
Yeah.
And so, since that's sort of like a governing principle for me, all my characters have little pieces of me, whether they're megalomaniac villains or whether they're an under the sea mermaid, or you know what I mean? Like I have to find something that makes sense to me so I can become that puppet and make them walk and talk.
Yeah.
Well, like Seth and Kendra feel very different, like complete opposites in some ways to me. But do you relate to both?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I relate to both. So Seth, I have a younger brother, Bryson, who is a recklessly curious kid. He was always a recklessly curious kid. Now he's a recklessly curious man. And and like,
as they often become.
I have a helping of that, right?
Yeah.
But he has a double helping of that. And so I saw a very Seth-like character in my brother Bryson. So sometimes I'm using observation.
Yeah.
And saying, oh, there's people like this. I've observed people like this. I'm going to do my version of a person like this, a person like my little brother Bryson. That's kind of like Seth. Then I've also observed that there's an archetype of like a responsible female, like maybe people who were my babysitter, people that were trusted with my care, a fairly responsible female. Okay, I will use some of my interactions with responsible females or some sisters, and I'll create a character named Kendra. And I made Kendra on purpose be a little more responsible, and Seth be a little more of a risk taker, because I wanted them to be learning opposite lessons. Because I believe both things are true. Sometimes there's times when you do need to take risks, and that's what Kendra's learning. And sometimes there's times when you do need to be careful, and the rule's there for a reason, and you're causing unnecessary harm. And that's what Seth has to learn. And so having a brother and sister learning opposite lessons at the same time, to me, felt thematically kind of interesting, along with their other personality traits and stuff.
Have you ever dabbled with writing in other genres?
Not very much. The main thing that I've written outside of my fantasy novels is I ran a sketch comedy troupe. Oh, and so I wrote comedy for a bunch of years, in college.
What's the name of the sketch comedy troupe?
It was called Divine Comedy. It was at BYU.
Yes.
And I was there.
I had no idea, by the way, that you were involved with Divine Comedy. What years? Because I was there and that was still a thing. Yeah,
it's still going. I was there I was doing it probably most from about 98 to 2003.
Okay.
And in those years, for some of those years, I was the president and the head writer, and like really, really deeply involved in that, and probably wrote about 100 skits over that time. And writing live comedy was a way to get instant feedback on my writing.
Right.
It was just like going to dialogue camp. Now that I look back at it, because you're writing for characters. And so it was just this massive practice on writing dialogue and having instantaneous feedback. They're either laughing or they're not. These are college kids. They spent their $3. They came to laugh. You know what I mean? And like you better give them their $3 worth of laughs, you know? And their date, that's $6 worth of laughs, you know, like maybe, right? And
plus like the creamery ice cream, at least a $10 date.
yeah, that's right. And so like, it was fun and interesting to work with a team of talented comedians, because I could write for their strengths.
Yeah.
Like, for example, there was a guy named Sean Hunley, and Sean was really good at playing the dumb guy. Mm-hmm. Like, if you gave him a character that had subpar intelligence, he could sell that all day long, like, and make it 10 times funnier than you wrote it. And so you're like, hey, note to self, give Sean some dumb characters to do. And if I take him down that road, he'll add to it and find lines I didn't see and mannerisms I couldn't have anticipated. And you just do that over and over. We had a girl named Marin who had this like little girl voice. She just sounded like, she still does. She'll be one of those little old ladies who sounds like a little kid. Like she's got this little girl voice, and she's got this very dark, twisted sense of humor. And so it was really fun to write stuff for her that she could deliver in this very childlike little girl voice that was twisted and that she totally understood every little nuance of the humor and could sell it really clean. That was really fun. And so like I said, by having these different comedians that I could write for, it was sort of like having an assortment of characters, each with their own character voice. And like, I spent 5 years in dialogue camp. And then as I was writing novels, it was so much easier to write a tight, funny scene, having written a bunch of comedy skits.
Yeah. That's incredible. It just feels like the diversity of experiences in writing really comes out in your work. And what would you encourage, budding authors or writers how would you encourage them to get more of that in their life?
Yeah. If you were a young author, I would say look for chances to write. Look for opportunities to write and take them. Right. And so when I say that, I mean, like, I wrote for my school newspaper. I took multiple advanced creative writing classes that I didn't have to take because I wanted to write across lots of genres and categories and just practice writing different things, persuasive writing and stuff that was even outside of my major. It was the 300 level writing classes that some people dread. I went and took them on purpose in other disciplines because I was like, I am quietly a writing major. This is what I want to do. Right. And so writing for the paper, writing for Divine Comedy, writing, like taking creative writing classes, of course, like the creative writing classes offered at BYU, I took what I could take, right? I took all that stuff. And then the big one, write in your own time. And the beautiful thing about writing in your own time is you can write exactly what you want to write. If you're writing for school, if you're writing for a job, that's not necessarily writing the things of your heart and the things of your soul, or even the things that you think are cool or fun, right? And so like, I encourage young writers to take time to write the stuff that they wish existed, the stuff that no one else will give them time to write. They have to take that time and write it. If you like scary stories, then write your scary stories in your free time, right? Yeah. That's your hobby. Do that instead of watch TV, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
I want to back up. You said you went to, did you say it was dialogue camp? Or what was it called? What was the camp?
writing for Divine Comedy was like attending dialogue.
Oh,
camp.
and I was like, is this a real camp? I was
it was like, if you could join a comedy troupe and write comedy skits, I would say do that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you want to work on dialogue, I can't think of a better way. If God was looking out for me, I think he definitely was then, because like that really helped my dialogue.
Okay. Cool. For a minute there, I was like, wait, what is this camp? I need to know about.
Divine Comedy is like still a thing at BYU or in Provo, correct?
Oh, is it?
Divine Comedy is when I did Divine Comedy, it was a student club. Now it's been absorbed, I think, into the theater program.
Yes.
And so it's an official institution at BYU now. And the kids that did Divine Comedy are also Studio C.
Yes.
Like certain generations of Divine Comedy came out and did Studio C. That was after my time.
Yes.
Like those guys are all like, for them, I was the ghost of Divine Comedy past. Right.
And they're like present. See, now they're past. I was there in 2007. So it was right when Studio C was starting to like kind of become a thing.
Yeah. Neat.
And so that's pretty fun. I didn't realize that connection. You mentioned that you've only written out of genre with the comedy and mentioned some kind of other small writing projects. But Fablehaven was originally an adult fantasy. Is that correct?
Well, here's the thing.
Okay.
Fablehaven itself was not ever planned to be an adult fantasy, but I myself was planning to write adult fantasy. I thought I was going to be more like Brandon Sanderson. I thought I was going to write big, fat adult fantasy epics.
Yeah.
And then when I wrote The Other End of the Hippo, the feedback I got all over the place from Chris Schobinger at Shadow Mountain, from different publishers was, hey, this feels like middle grade.
Yeah.
This feels more like middle grade. Like it's an epic story and it's really cool, but it feels more like like the vibe is more middle grade than adult epic.
Yeah.
And with a little time and practice, I just realized I'm more Harry Potter than Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like my voice, my imagination, I love Harry Potter. Like that's one of my big three for like my biggest influences. Mm-hmm. And the kind of stories I tell are a little more Harry Potter than Game of Thrones.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like that's just
totally,
it's naturally what bubbles out of me. And so as I sort of matched my work to my voice, middle grade became my home.
Yeah. Two questions. First, what is your other one of the three? Narnia, Harry Potter. What's your other one?
What is it?
Yeah, Narnia, Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings are my big three. Like Narnia showed me how imaginative a fantasy could be. Lord of the Rings showed me how realistic you could make a fantasy feel like an authentic history.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Where it felt momentous and important.
Yes.
And then Harry Potter showed me you could write a story with a young main character, but make it smart and twisty so an adult could like it too, so the whole family could read it together. And that kind of defined the kind of stuff that I wanted to write.
Yeah.
As I kind of found my voice, it was like, oh, all my stuff fits this Harry Potter audience. So thank you forever, J.K. Rowling, because like you sort of blazed open a trail of a kind of book that's like where I live. That's all my books fit in that category in one way or another.
We talk about that a lot on the podcast and just in our personal lives when we're just together, is those trailblazing books that come out at the right time and say the right thing at the right time.
Yeah. And make a category. Like there was no category for Harry Potter books until Harry Potter. The prevailing opinions in the industry were kids won't read fantasy.
Correct.
Which is a strange opinion, like looking back in hindsight.
I know.
But at the time, it was very believed that if a kid wants to read fantasy, they're nerdy enough that they'll just jump up to adult fantasy.
They'll take the leap to Lord of the Rings.
They'll leap to Lord of the Rings or do some Narnia or do stuff like that. And we don't really need to write books for them in a middle grade kind of level. And also that kids won't read thick books.
Yeah.
And Harry Potter kind of blew both those out of the water. And so now it's okay to write a thicker middle grade book, and it's okay to write a fantasy book for kids, which could have been a no-brainer if you'd really done the math.
Well, this is when marketing is telling creative people what is
exactly
going to
right.
sell.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Harry Potter comes out and it creates a category for middle grade fantasy, like big, grand, imaginative middle grade fantasy, which Rick Riordan and Brandon Mull and some other people are really happy happened.
Yeah.
And then you've got Twilight, which created something
I was just
called
say
paranormal romance or teen paranormal romance, which was like a section. I don't even know if it's still a section, but for a good while there was a section in the bookstore called teen paranormal romance.
And then someone like Sarah
Twilight.
J. Maas takes this Twilight, this like paranormal kind of thing. Yeah. And she created basically new adult, which is it's kind of written for a young adult audience, but it's adult content. And so like we've kind of psychoanalyzed like what is the reader's journey through these things. But I really feel like Harry Potter, the like bridged the gap to like, or those readers grew into Twilight and then they grew into Sarah J. Maas. So you have just like this, the fantasy genre and paranormal genre as a whole has just really blossomed over the last 30 to 40 years. Because for a while there, it kind of just felt like these staples of, you know, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and, you know, you get Roald Dahl as well. But there, it's so pervasive
and Wrinkle
now.
in Time and, you know, there's this and that, right? But like now they're very more firmly established. And dystopia, right, too, with Hunger Games. That's another big category creator.
Still, I think one of the best dystopian novels of all time or series of all time.
Yeah, it helped flesh out and create the category. Like it helped the category happen.
Yeah.
Because it was so popular.
Which is good. Which kind of brings me, this is more of a personal question, just kind of since I had similar experiences in the BYU experience with why do you think that Utah puts out so many talented authors? Because there is a heavy concentration of, I would say, LDS authors, fantasy authors, and fiction authors, as well as just writers in general that are coming out of BYU and out of the Utah area.
Yeah. You know, I've tried to figure this out. And one thing that I do know is, for some reason, a bunch of the Utah people and members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or Mormons are pretty into fantasy.
Right.
There's just a, like, and so the people that are into fantasy are going to write the fantasies. And for some reason, lots of us like fantasy, like tons of my friends growing up, whether it was in Connecticut or California or Utah, a lot of my LDS friends were also into fantasy. And I know everybody, like there's a lot of people into fantasy. So that's not the only reason,
right? But
that's part of it. Part of it might be that there is a strong community here, and sometimes a strong community leads to a stronger community, right? Because like there were people I could ask questions to that were in the Utah community that were writing books, and sometimes people in that community asked me, and so like the fact that there's a community is maybe part of it, and maybe some of it is just when you live like a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and you don't like drink and you don't smoke, it's like you got to do something.
That was my thought.
You got to fill up your time.
And it's like, fantasy, you know, make believe. Like I'll make up stories. That'll be fun, you know.
Yeah.
You know, it's either get on an ice block and slide down a grassy hill or go watch fantasy movies, I guess.
That's a very apt way to describe my college.
I was all familiar. Yep.
It's like, what are we going to do besides party or whatever?
Yeah, because the party is not the thing. Yeah. It's interesting. I feel like when you talked about community, immediately when I started writing, because I am a hobby writer and have been long before LitJoy. My first piece that I remember distinctly getting recognition on was in 4th grade. And it was about, now looking back, I'm all, it was just Tatooine. Like I didn't realize it was Star Wars.
Okay.
But like it's a girl who walks out in this desert planet and she lives in like this hut, you know, and so I remember coming to BYU and actually having like writing networks that were kind of built in a little bit, and then joining a writing group was quite easy, and then joining a book club was very easy, and then book club led to LitJoy. And so there is kind of just this appreciation for literature that's very much a part of the culture.
Yeah.
And it always has been. And I wonder if
that's
it's
a good insight. Just generally, there's an appreciation for literature in the culture. I think that's true. That's my experience too.
Yeah. And also LDS families or Latter-day Saint families read with their kids their whole life because they're reading scripture. And so like you are reading an epic story from the Book of Mormon your whole life, which is so interesting because you want to talk about an epic story. That's an epic story, right?
Kingdoms and battles and wars and supernatural and, you know, angels and miracles and all that stuff. Yeah. Most of what the Princess Bride has.
Correct. Or so you could pick either one, but you're getting it at the same place. Just kidding.
Right. I always love asking, which is, if you could sit down to have coffee or tea with any author, living or deceased, who would you choose and why?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's obviously one of my big three.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
It would probably depend on the day, which one.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's anyone, it's either C.S. Lewis or Tolkien. It's probably C.S. Lewis. Like if it had to be one, it's probably C.S. Lewis, which I actually said earlier. But
yeah.
As I think about it, I mean, like if
we'll allow both.
If it's living or dead, you got to take dead.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's still a chance.
J.K. Rowling could happen.
Never know.
But like, the Tolkien's rough to have happen unless I'm using my magical book wish.
Yeah.
And so probably C.S. Lewis, because I would love to talk to him about Narnia, and I would love to talk to him about his religious writings. I'm a spiritual person, and so he's interesting to me on both those levels. And I know Tolkien had a spiritual life too. So either of those men would be so fascinating for me to talk to. I would love it.
And I think they were friends and a bit of a spicy friendship in that they would challenge one another.
Yes.
And so they're probably up there like, who's going to pick? You know, I can just picture them being like,
that's right.
C.S. Lewis is like, I won.
He's all,
let's all three get together. You know what I mean? Like,
you're like, we're open.
If you're fighting over me, guys.
That's awesome.
I'll make time for both of you.
Yeah. Oh, that's very generous of you.
Yeah, right.
So it might be Narnia, but I'm going to ask, is there a book that you recommend to just like everyone?
I recommend Ender's Game to anybody who's like a high school age reader. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's one of my favorite. It was my favorite book in high school.
It's good.
Ender's Game. I'll say that one for this. And Orson Scott Card gave me some mentoring early in my career.
Cool.
So on top of that, it's like he was nice to me, and I think his book's awesome. So I'll say Ender's Game.
Okay, that's a good one. It's so creative and clever. I read a lot of the series, but
being inside Ender's head is like being inside the mind of a genius. And that's hard to do in a movie, but in the book, he does it really effectively.
Okay.
And it's really fun to be inside the mind of a genius. I remember for years after that, when I had to take a test in school or something, I would think, what would Ender do? You know what I mean? Because he was so strategic and like airtight in his thinking. And I was like, I want to think like that. I want to be like that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What are you working on right now? Can you tell us anything?
Yeah, I can talk about that.
I'll bring it on.
So like, there's two big things I'm working on right now. I have a big new series coming through Random House, which will be a 3-book series.
Very cool.
If I have a masterpiece in me, this might be it.
Oh.
Like truly like
Good
this.
vibes.
This has a high ceiling for what it could be. The first book's written, and I'm doing the edits on that. That doesn't come out until fall of 25.
Okay.
So it's like a long lead time. And then I'm working on another project. Can I talk about this, Chris? So I'm working on another project that will be, I'm going to do a novel about Newell and Doran in Fablehaven. So Newell and Doran are the satyrs in Fablehaven, and we're going to make a Newell and Doran novel.
Oh, I love it.
And that'll be a little shorter than most of the Fablehaven novels, but not way shorter. It'll be a good solid book. You know what I mean? Like I'm very excited about it. They are funny characters.
Yeah.
I've thought of an adventure that I think will be a lot of fun, and that'll actually come out before the other book. Though I'm writing it after the other book. I'm writing it right now, and that'll come out. Should come out in like spring of 25.
And then a couple of years ago, and when we were doing a middle grade crate, we did Dragon Watch, of course. And is there a connection between your Dragon Watch world and Fablehaven, or how does that all connect?
Yeah. So it's something that still people are figuring out because we did a different series title. You know, I wrote 5 Fablehaven books. I told everyone that was the complete series. And so I tried to stay true to that. But when I got another idea for the same main characters in the same story world, I wrote a direct sequel series to Fablehaven called Dragon Watch. And so together, Fablehaven and Dragon Watch form basically a 10-book series. And if anything, I like Dragon Watch a little better. Like those 10 books are really solid side by side. And so if you liked Fablehaven and you haven't found Dragon Watch, that exists.
Yeah. Wow. Maybe we'll do something with Dragon Watch, and we'll do like leatherette continuation.
Yeah. I mean, if Fablehaven did well, that would make tons of sense because they really are companion series.
Yeah.
Like if Fablehaven is a little bit more Kendra's story, Dragon Watch is a little bit more Seth's story.
Oh, for sure.
And then overall with the two, you have this almost perfect balance because they're both in all of it, you know?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Okay, last question. Where can readers find you online, and where can they follow you?
So readers can find me online at brandonmull.com. That's like for the basics.
Okay.
If you want to kind of follow me, then, you know, find me on Facebook or Meta.
Okay.
Find me on Instagram. Find me on X or Twitter, right?
I know they've all been renamed.
Yeah.
Everything's renamed. I don't know why we're rebranding names we're very familiar with, but
okay.
But those are if you find me at those 3 places, if anything, I will be doing more on there than I have been. And I'm pretty regular on those places. That's a findable spot for me.
So do you think there would ever be anything other media around your books? For example, film deals or TV series?
Yeah, that's almost happened. The places that it has almost happened many times is with Fablehaven and Candy Shop War. Mm-hmm. Both Fablehaven and Candy Shop War have been optioned multiple times. And lately, there is a team of guys who may have finally cracked the code on Fablehaven. Like it looks very likely that a Fablehaven movie isn't just optioned. It's been optioned for a while by these guys, but it might be heading into production. And so if that happens, that would be very exciting because
we're both like,
yay! I've been waiting a long time. A lot of people have been waiting a long time. Like a lot of people think that would be really fun, and I'm one of them. I think it would be fun. It would be cool to see if they can do a good job. That would be really fun to see it in a new medium.
Oh my gosh, amazing! If you do, we have to do a party. We have to do a premiere party.
Yeah,
sending vibes. Sending good vibes.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So fingers crossed, and send out good vibes, and hopefully this will be the time when it totally works out. Because there's been a few times when it was looking kind of good and then it didn't. But this has gone farther. They've got a good screenplay, and it looks like they might have funding in place, and like the real things that have to happen might be happening. Okay. So that would be really exciting.
That's exciting.
At our world. Yay. So is it more along, did you say a movie or a miniseries?
This would be a feature film.
Okay.
Perfect. They're looking to make a feature film of book 1. And then we would go from there depending on how that does.
Yes.
I feel really good about this.
Awesome. Well,
Brandon, it'd be exciting.
Gosh, thank you so much for taking time to come and chat with us and to talk about writing. I know young writers and young readers both appreciate that. So
it is my pleasure. Thank you for hosting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. We really do appreciate it. You've been a delight to talk with. And I have more questions, but we should wrap up because
we'll do round 2.
We got round 2
because of time. Yeah, somewhere down the road, if you want to talk again, just let me know.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the LitJoy podcast. Please remember to rate and review us.
And like a good book, recommend us to your friends.